Are we recording? We're gonna start. Welcome to the Budget Education City Services Committee of CB5, BEX for short. My name is Julie Chu, the Vice Chair of the committee, and I will be your chair this evening. Before we begin, I'd like to give a brief overview of how this committee works. Each presenter will have the opportunity to speak to the committee, and when their presentation is concluded, the committee will have the opportunity to ask questions. And when all of the committee's questions have been answered, members of the public will be permitted to ask questions. Once all of those questions have been addressed, the committee will go into what is known as business session. This is when only members of the BEX committee discuss the issues amongst themselves and determine what action to take. We would like to stress that everyone's view is respected in this committee, and I would encourage every single member here to share their views. We all join the board in order to contribute to the betterment of our neighborhood, and the best way for each of us to do that is to fully participate in these discussions. The BEX committee is somewhat different than other committees in CB5 in that we do not have applications come to us, so our determinations are not as straightforward. We may decide to draft a resolution or a letter, or we may use the presentations as a first step in gathering information to inform ourselves and the community so that we may take action in the future, which is what we have tonight in one of our presentations. When the committee does have an action item before it, the issue will be voted upon by all present members of the BEX committee. Should the resolution pass, it will then be presented to the full CB5 board for a vote. And that vote is the final position of the board, which is in this instance, February 8th. So we have 3 items tonight. The first is a presentation by Marissa Yanni of the Department of Sanitation, who will give us an update on waste containerization. Second, we will continue a conversation on the mayor's mental health roadmap. You all have received a copy of the document. We are concentrating on page 31 to 44 tonight. In the last meeting, Brian Stetson introduced the plan overall. We spent some time speaking specifically about a portion of the plan. So today we will look overall at the overall plan with Steve Coe. And finally, we have an action item, which is our opportunity to comment on the mayor's preliminary budget. You all have been sent a copy of the budget along with the register of our budget requests and the agency's responses from OMB. You also have received information on how our responses should generally look in a draft that was already started. So let's take a look and make changes. Add to the draft, talk about the preliminary budget and the responses we received and what we would like to say here. So I'm going to hand it to Marissa for updates from DSNY.
Hi, good evening, everybody. I'm just going to share my screen real quick. Let's go with that one. Do you all see a presentation or a PowerPoint of some sort? Okay, seeing, sorry, wasn't looking, seeing. Okay, so I'm just going to be going kind of quickly over the new commercial containerization rules that we have with the Department of Sanitation, and then, of course, answer any questions that you may have. So, of course, DSNY is committed to making New York City cleaner, less cluttered, and improving the quality of life of all New Yorkers, except the rats, as we can see from our beautiful photo of the rat. We're hoping that containerization is, of course, just going to remove the mountains of black garbage bags that we see on our streets every single day, especially in Manhattan, because you guys all get 3-day-a-week trash collection. So trying to get rid of all that. So between commercial containerization effort and sweeping new residential rules, we're hoping 70% of the city's trash is going to be heading into containers. Again, getting rid of all these mountains and mountains of black bags that are super easy, that can be ripped open. I think everyone here has probably seen that, bags that are ripped open, rats are going into them, just pretty gross at the end of the week when all that is said and done. So bins with secure lids are going to make it harder for rats to find food. They won't be able to smell it as easily, especially if you get businesses are using some really durable ones. And with the closed lid, they won't be able to easily get through it. This will hopefully make it a lot harder for them so that we don't have a ton of that rat buffet happening with the black bags. So thinking about commercial containerization rules. So all businesses in New York City must use labeled bins with secure lids when setting out trash and organics. So this does not apply to recyclables, and we're going to get into a little more of that in a second. But to go over the dates of these rules. So starting back in August, all food-related businesses had to put their trash and organic material inside a bin with a lid. Then starting on September 5th of last year, chain stores had to do the same thing as well. So those at the moment are the only two types of businesses that have to containerize their trash. Starting March 1st, every single type of business has to containerize their trash and organic material. We don't care what they sell. I don't care what they do with their day-to-day businesses. If they do not receive collection from the Department of Sanitation, if they are a commercial business, they have to put their trash and organic material inside a container with a lid. There will be a warning period of 1 month, so we will not start enforcement until April 1st. That first month, we're going to do a lot of education, reaching out to more businesses that are doing the rules. If we get any kind of reports from community boards and from residents, if you're saying that there's maybe a business that isn't doing it properly, that's when we'll be able to sit down and chat with them and make sure they know the rules. But we started that already, so hopefully it won't be too many folks that don't know. So just going over again what has to be put into a container: trash and organic material. And then once it's in that bin, that can be set out an hour before closing. So whatever time the business closed, if it closes at 4 p.m., at 3 o'clock, they can set out this container. And now looking at recyclables. So a container is optional for recyclables. It might be easier for some folks to do that. They can still put it out in a clear plastic bag. And then if it's like paper or cardboard, they can just twine it together and stack it up. That's fine. But if it's in a bag or just set out in the stacked up paper, it can't be put out until after 8 p.m. So that is something that might hinder a couple of commercial businesses, and we're hoping to walk them through that process to realize if they want to put it out an hour before closing, again, especially if they close a bit earlier, which some places do in Manhattan, then they'll have to put it all into containers. So this rule doesn't apply to businesses that have waste collected from a loading dock. I've been saying this a bit. I don't know who has a loading dock, but those lucky ones that do, they do not have to put it in a container, because they'll be taken right from the loading dock. So of course, food-related businesses are a leading generator of food waste and rotting trash in this city. So we're hoping these new rules will definitely assist with reducing the food sources for rats on the streets and align with other city initiatives to containerize waste and create cleaner neighborhoods. There is the commercial organics law. If a business is already required to separate organics, they're also required to containerize that waste for collection. So where do businesses get bins? They should definitely check with their private waste carters. The Department of Sanitation is not giving out any bins. We're not giving bins to any businesses. They need to decide what kind of type of bin works best for the private carter and then for them, all depending on how much room they have in their business. And it just needs to be clearly labeled for what type of material is inside the bin. So where should these bins be stored? They can be stored inside or in a rear yard. Not a lot of rear yards in Manhattan. If space is not available, they could be stored within 3 feet of the building line when not set out for collection. So of course, when they're set up for collection, they have to be super close to the curb. And then otherwise, if they can't go inside the building or inside the business, they can go up to 3 feet from that line. It has to be maintained in a neat and orderly manner and always allow for a clear path for pedestrians to travel on the sidewalk. Totally understand that this might mean the amount of space on sidewalks might start to decrease between the bins if there's a restaurant and dining shed, other planters that might be on the streets, A-frame signs. So I think this is something the Department of Sanitation, we're definitely cognizant of this, and seeing once we start to have more of these bins on the street, how many that can't be stored inside, what this is going to look like as you're walking up and down the street. Are there any exceptions to this rule? Not really, unless there's a mayoral declaration of a health or solid waste emergency. Not really sure what that would be, but if that happens, then we won't have people using containers. If our commissioner determines that weather conditions are unfit for use of bins or it would constitute a public nuisance, then that's the only exception really to this rule. Otherwise, starting March 1st, every single commercial business, regardless of what they do or sell, will have to be using containers for their trash and organic material. couple of resources that are on our website that folks can use, and some copies of mailers. If anyone here needs that information, I can also get it for you. And then some questions. I'll leave up the presentation for another minute, and then I'll take it down to better answer folks. But happy to answer any questions y'all have.
Questions on the committee? Brad?
Yeah, I have two. Thank you for that presentation. That was very helpful, very concise and clear. First question is, in areas where there's issues with the sidewalk width, which I feel like is probably not going to be 0% of Manhattan, what are some of the sort of intended thoughts, or what are the plans for how that might be addressed?
Well, we're hoping that most businesses can put them inside their building. And once we start getting out there and seeing, I think that's where the month of March is really going to come into play. How many of those businesses aren't putting them inside that have to leave them outside, seeing how much space that we actually have. So at the moment, I don't have a clear answer for you, but as we learn more, once more and more of the businesses put out these bins, we'll be able to see how much space we really have. Or don't have, I guess.
Thank you. And then the other question is, after the April 1st deadline, what does the fines look like? How is that administered, or and like sort of, oh, there's a piece of paper. Okay.
Sorry. I just gave you my new talking points today. Sorry. I just want to make sure I have the correct answer for you. I think it's like 50, but I'm sorry. Hold on one second. Okay, here we go. Sorry. It's like a 6-page document that they give me. So all set outs violations are subject to fines of $50 for a first offense, $100 for a second, $200 for third and subsequent offenses within a 12-month period. And this includes setting out too early, improper or insufficient bins, and failure to store bins properly. So it looks like $200.
So is each day, so if a business did it improperly for 3 days in a row, they'd get 50, 100, 20, 200?
Yeah.
And is there any concern about that number? Because I mean, 200 is not nothing, but it's not, I could imagine some businesses deciding that it's worth violating the rule for $200 a day. Is there thoughts about changing that number if that happens to be the case?
Not at the moment. I do not know if the price comes from us or the city council, so I will have to get back to you on that if that's something we set ourselves, because that's within the code. But I will say, because that technically that rule, or what's the word, that violation code is already in our system, and that's what the prices are. So I don't know if that would increase now that every single business has to containerize. That's definitely something to think about. Thank you.
Thank you.
So thanks for the presentation. I'm curious if folks are thinking about like pickup frequency changes, especially like when it's warm outside. I noticed like trash definitely piling up, and some folks just like throwing individual trash into the bins as well. And there's still a lot of spillage. So curious how the agency is thinking about that.
So since technically we don't pick up their garbage for businesses, I can't really make a business increase their frequency or anything like that. Our commercial waste zones are coming out soon. I believe we're starting in Queens. I don't have the date on that in front of me. I apologize. I just saw something brief about it today. So we will have to see, because if businesses are then going to have to change their carter, that's a whole new, my God, contract. Sorry, I'm losing it today. I'm tired. I'm the last one in the office. For that contract. So they may want to do an increase in frequency collection, but at the moment they're not mandated to do that from us, and that's not something we could enforce. We can't yell at them about that. We can totally suggest it. We tell everybody, every day collection is fantastic, but we can't force anybody to do that.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Charles and I have a question, and Renee.
Charles, Renee?
Yeah, hello. Hi everyone. Charles Nye here. So I'm concerned. I have a question. Would it be possible, I don't know if it'd be feasible, if some of the businesses that have outdoor dining, that have these bins that would reduce the pedestrian space, I don't know if there's a way that there could be some sort of map or list of these locations just to help people who are in wheelchairs or who are blind to know where these areas are. And I'm concerned because obviously a wheelchair would need space to pass by the bin and the outdoor dining, and also elderly people with walkers, and like I said, the blind who use a cane. I'm just wondering what could be done to help that sort of situation so they're not crashing into the bin or the tables or being pushed by the pedestrians? Thank you.
That's a really, really great idea. So actually that does exist. I just checked. The Department of Transportation has an open restaurant map. Can I put it in the chat? Is that okay? I'm gonna do it. So in there, I'm not looking at their map. It actually lists where all these outdoor dining sheds are and who's part of the open restaurants program. Technically, because that's through the Department of Transportation, that is all that's on, they hold that information and they host it on their website. But I put a link in the chat, sorry,
So,
that folks can look at. I hope that's helpful.
so are you saying all those locations would be an issue with the bin and would all those locations reduce the sidewalk?
Yeah, it could be. I don't know exactly which restaurants that have an outdoor dining shed also cannot store their bins inside their building. I don't know who that is off the top of my head, and I don't know if we have that information. That's just kind of anecdotal, what we see as we walk down the block and we notice. And again, that always sometimes could change. A business could have a bin one day and then they buy a new one the next day and it can't fit inside, or now it does fit inside. I feel businesses have that free reign, I guess you could say. They have that freedom that they could switch it up as often as they want because it's between them and the private carter.
Well, I definitely think something should be looked into about that to keep accessibility, or else there's going to be blocks where people are going to struggle or might feel like they can't walk down because of that issue. So if your department could look into that, or if something could be more focused on that issue, that would be great.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate
welcome.
that flag. Yes. Thank you.
Renee?
We can't hear you, Renee.
Hear me at all? Can you hear me
Now you can.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much, Marissa. I'm wondering, as we hear of the City of Yes proposals, and we hear about businesses being offered, having the opportunity in private, locations, private buildings, how is this going to dovetail with sanitation? Right? You have a business on a second floor, a private building, how would that dovetail?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear one part of part of what you said. How does this then connect with the City of Yes?
Yes. Sorry, couldn't you hear me at all? Yeah.
Sorry, that's a bit better. I'm sorry. I think it was just your microphone was a
All right.
little far away.
So I'm wondering, as we hear all the City of Yes proposals, and we hear about sort of businesses being able to operate on second floors and in private residences, how is that going to dovetail with the sanitation rules? Like, is there some thought about how sanitation is going to dovetail with the new, City of Yes proposals?
I don't know too much about the City of Yes, aside from literally what you just said, is that businesses will be able to operate in residential areas and in buildings. So at the moment, we do have where like people live above like a restaurant or something like that. And it does get a little confusing with whose garbage is who. So we try to make sure that the restaurant, for instance, has a bin that says like blank Carter, Marissa Carding Service, so that we know whose garbage is which, because a lot of times it's similar. So I think there will be a little bit of confusion. So unfortunately, I don't have too much to add to your point. I think that's a great point. I think it's going to be a lot more of a mishmash of whose garbage is who. And especially if that business now on the second floor or in one apartment inside this building is operating, how do we make sure that their garbage is being picked up properly and that it's containerized and know that they exist there too? I think that is going to be a bit of a challenge for us.
Yeah, that's all right. So hi, good job. I have a question about public spaces like the Green Market or 40th Street alongside Bryant Park, which all year long generate tons and tons and tons and tons and more garbage. How is this going to affect the rules that these Green Market type places have to live up to?
Right, that's going to be a little difficult. I don't know how it's going to specifically affect a Green Market because that is technically a vendor. They're a business, but I don't think a lot of them have bins that they could put out I mean, a lot of them are inside parks, right? Like parkland. Right, like if you're next to Bryant Park, you're pretty close to that. No, I apologize. I'm gonna have to get back to you regarding green markets. I don't have a definitive answer for you. I don't want you to wait for me to read everything in here, because it's probably not gonna help me. I apologize.
Bryant Park, which also generates a ton of waste during the winter all year long. And
We
it's
don't pick
piled
up that garbage though. That's Bryant Park is through the Parks Department. They have their own rules for how their garbage is stored. It's how they can store it. Truly, we assist a little bit, definitely for parks, but for an actual park, the Parks Department, I think that might be a follow-up with the Parks Department. And then if they punt it back to me, then I'll take care of that. But if that's okay, I might have to shelf that question for now.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Any other questions? Any questions from the public? I don't see any attendees, actually. Oh,
But I have a comment, so I'll wait till you ask me.
any comments?
Yes, thank you. So just want to point out, and Marissa, thanks for the presentation. I'm right off the Fifth Avenue and 28th Street. And so we have a lot of sidewalk cafes. We still have some sidewalk sheds, and we're already having a great deal of difficulty with pedestrians passing by, particularly where we have bus stops, rainy days, we have umbrellas much of the time. We have people in wheelchairs, babies in carriages and so forth. So I hope you guys are gonna be very proactive on where these bins are gonna be stored. So thank you.
Thank you, I appreciate that. I'll make sure we send extra enforcement to your block. And we'll get everybody. Joking, sorry. Yes, thank you so much. I've been raising this to my boss a few times. So I'm hoping hoping by April 1st, we'll see what enforcement starts doing. But that is something we can enforce, is that there is a pedestrian pathway. And hopefully wide enough, of course, that everybody, stroller, wheelchair, umbrellas, everybody can pass through. So we'll make sure of that.
Okay, any other comments? Okay, thank you, Marissa, for coming to our committee.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. Have a great rest of your night.
Me too, thank you.
Thank you.
So next, we're gonna have a presentation from Steve Coe. Hi, Steve.
Hi there. Can I share my screen?
Yes, please.
So I was invited to talk about the city's mental health plan. And I think what's important to start with is that I'm not finding my.
I wasn't sure, Mary, if you want to introduce Steve Coe, sometimes we.
Sure, just a very brief introduction. Steve, for over 3 decades, was the head of community access, which provided outreach, permanent housing for people with mental illness, and more recently pioneered the approach of joint intervention with police, with an eye towards moving to have social workers and people who are specifically trained in crisis management and crisis intervention for people who are in extreme psychiatric episodes, to try to decrease, obviously violent outcomes in those situations. I know that doesn't do you justice, Steve. He was on the board of the Coalition for the Homeless for many years and is really a national leader, and has been on the front lines of actually providing services and advocacy for the mentally ill.
Thanks, Mary.
Thanks, Mary. Can you see this Conference of Local Mental Hygiene Directors site?
Yes.
Okay. So the state has a system of mental health planning. It's under section 5.07 of the mental hygiene law. And under that provision, the state is supposed to have a 5-year strategic plan, a statewide plan. And you can Google the OMH 507 site and see if you can find that plan. The last one was in 2016, I think. They haven't updated it. But it also requires that each county develop a mental health plan each year. there's several issues with that. We can't really have a strategic plan that's annual because some of these issues are very broad. And it also creates 57 different plans. And you can go on this Conference of Mental Hygiene Directors site, and you go down here to the contact local mental hygiene department, and you can scroll through. So the first thing to pull up is New York City does this. New York City is considered one county under this system, and then there's 57 other counties. And you can see the local plans that the city has submitted each year. So if you click last year, you get a plan. And I know I'm here to talk about the plan that came out in the spring, but this is another plan that the city put out, and it's loading now. I think I have it in another tab. I can go over there and grab it. But what you'll see is that there are 10 broad goals described in this plan. There's 5 in the plan that's in the. Just make it a little bigger here, just so you get an idea. In addition to the goals, there are numerous sub goals. So, first one deals with children and youth. The second one, goal 2, also deals with youth exposed to risk factors. That's ACEs. Goal 3 deals with investment in stable housing. And what's missing from all of these plans is not just cities, is there's no specific like target numbers or anything attached to these, even though later on there's a whole needs assessment. And this is a format that the state requires each community to use. So everybody's doing basically the same thing. And all of them have the same gap in terms of how do you know what you're doing is effective year in and year out? Because there's really no specifics in these things. In terms of numbers, how many housing units, they talk about crisis responses, the number of crisis responses, but there's no like target for how much they would reduce that. Here's the housing problem. There's 11,000 units of supported housing, but we need more. There's no real target number. There's more people sleeping that are homeless since the Great Depression. 13,000 people experiencing homelessness in the shelter system. So a plan would say, all right, we want to reduce that number to 11,000 within the next 12 months. We want to reduce that number to 8,000 within the next 3 years. And the strategy to do that is going to be doing X, Y, and Z. So all of that is missing from this plan. Let me go over here, pull up. So this is that plan I was just looking at. Here's the city's current plan. This is what they put out last spring, which has got a lot of, in terms of its overall principles involved, is quite good. Recognizes that underserved communities are Black and brown communities, that there's structural racism built into the system. Where's this? It's got a set of principles here in a second. Here we go. Building principles, equity, human rights, approaches should be informed by data, and the lived experience of people who use mental health services, trauma-informed strategies. So all this stuff is great. And there's really no issue in this plan, because you need to have these kind of principles before you actually begin building a plan. Because what are your rules you're going to use as you're going to follow? It's like building a house. But you're going to, what kind of materials you're going to use, and what are your goals? It's going to be a passive house. You're going to energy conscious and so forth. If you go down into the plan itself, let's see, page 21, page 33. You get to their broad goals, which, by the way, if you do a search on either this document or the other one, and you search for involuntary or removal, it doesn't appear. So even though there is yet another initiative by the city to expand involuntary removals, it's not mentioned directly in any of these documents. So and the issue with this plan is this similar to the one that we just looked at. There's no specific goals. Here's again, 13,000 people are homeless. It is a major cause of stress, unnecessary hospitalizations. This is the broad strategy: improving care, expand housing. This is expanding infrastructure. They call it, clubhouse programs and stuff like that. And then a health-led response to mental health crisis. And this is the Be Heard program. This is where they're sending out social workers in place of police in select precincts around the city. So that's pretty new, and it's not widely implemented yet. But we can talk about that. So these broad goals there's nothing wrong with them, but there's just really nothing specific that they can address. And if you came back a year from now and to see how this was doing, you would have a very hard time determining if they'd done any of these things. And some of them are very difficult to measure. Address racial inequalities. You could be looking at, have they developed any new preventive services in neighborhoods of color? And in which case you would have to, like, what neighborhoods are those, and what kind of prevention services would be effective in those neighborhoods? And then what sort of either RFPs or kind of discussions are being held with the people who live in those communities about what would be helpful. The housing options, again, 13,000 people in the shelter system, but to have a real plan, you would say, well, how are we going to address this? What sort of strategies are we going to use to start bringing down that number? And I don't know how many of you probably remember Roseanne Haggerty has an organization now called Community Solutions, in which they are tackling this very issue through a data-driven response, where instead of just calling people homeless, like, who are these people and what exactly does each person need, and what kind of strategy, or there's like groups of people have similar issues, and you can actually, if you put a strategy in place and implement it over a period of time, you can actually see some very positive results. So that would be, the type of thing that the city needs to be working on. A statement like coordinate with New York State to increase the number of transitional housing units is completely meaningless without some kind of a specific kind of numbers attached to it, and who's going to have that conversation, and is this really even practical? And the state is not developing any more transitional housing units anyway. A lot of agencies are turning those programs back in because they're financially difficult to operate. So there's some stuff in here that doesn't make a lot of sense. There is this housing blueprint. Again, it lacks a lot of specifics on how to actually achieve any of this stuff. There is and then you had here's the clubhouse program. There was a huge controversy this last few months. The city put out an RFP to expand the number of clubhouse members from 5,000 to 15,000, but actually shrink the number of clubhouses from, I think, 18 to 16, and have much larger programs. There was a massive protest, to say the least. They delayed the RFP deadline 3 times. It was finally, I think last week was the final for submission of documents. So even something that people think as a whole a good thing, they really did a terrible job in sort of designing it, and they really didn't have a conversation with the community about a strategy. If you want to go from 5,000 to 15,000, what does that look like in terms of the practicality of it, and where would you put these programs? They want to serve the underserved communities. So it's a complex undertaking, but was done without any real consultation. So, you know, they're saying they're going to increase the capacity of clubhouses in high need areas, but there really was no strategy to do that. There is a mention here to Brian Stetton's favorite program, the behavioral health, the mayor's, what the heck is it? The Adams psychiatric crisis care legislative agenda. So there you find this package of services where they want to change state law to make it easier to have involuntary removals. And what's interesting about that, it came out last year. It was in November 2022 that they announced that. And Dr. Katz, who's a head of health and hospitals, and Dr. Bassan, who's the head of the city's health department, were on New York One defending the policy. And they said it actually applies to a very small number of people in extreme need. And they were citing 1,000 people with serious mental illness who are homeless, 3,500 street homeless. This was Dr. Katz. 1,000 with serious mental illness, and about 200, he said, are so distressed they cannot see the need for help. So I can send you the link to that New York One thing. So they are attempting to change state law to address 200 people, is what it boils down to. And a different strategy might be, let's go look at these 200 people and bring together providers, people who've been homeless, and talk about what kind of strategies that you could use to address these 200 people and start dealing with them on an individual basis, instead of just lumping people together as seriously mentally ill. We're not done yet. There's another, so we got this plan that was put out for the state, and then you have this other plan that was put out last spring. Then you have the Mayor's Office of Community Mental Health. So you have another area that's doing mental health policy, and what they say is down at the bottom here is they're supporting the city's mental health care plan, which we looked at just earlier. But their two main initiatives are this, the Be Heard, which is the 911 mental health response, and something called this Academy of Behavioral Health, which is supposed to train people in some way. I don't really know. I know a lot about the 911 mental health response. As Mary alluded to, I started with my colleague at Community Access, what Correct Crisis Intervention Today, NYC, back in 2012, to develop a community-based response to mental health crises. And part of that strategy was to reduce the number of crises in the first place, and through prevention strategies, which the city is not really doing. The issue around the 911, the Be Heard program, let's see if I can get it to come up here. It's very slow in taking off. We had several recommendations around hiring, training, and supervision for this program. The city ignored everything. So they are only hiring licensed social workers, and they're not necessarily hiring people who live in the communities. So if you look on, you got to be a licensed clinical social worker to apply for any of these positions. So they're having a hard time because a lot of the people with these credentials don't necessarily want to work on mobile crisis teams in high need neighborhoods. That's not why they went to social work school. So as a consequence, they're having a hard time hiring people. There's turnover in these jobs, and they're hiring people who are not necessarily familiar with the neighborhoods. Taking all this together, I hosted a series of, we hired the Public Policy Lab about 2 years ago and held a series of discussions around what kind of a response could we develop that would address this at a more fundamental level. So we launched a campaign called Seat at the Table, and we have drafted a piece of legislation which should be introduced, I think, in the next week or two, to transform the way mental health planning works at the local level and then ultimately at the state level. So we would replace all that county planning stuff with collaboratively built goals and strategies that would include providers, peers, subject experts, county officials, and they would develop what we're describing as a 5-year or 10-year strategic plans with measurable outcomes. So from year to year, you could tell which strategies were actually working and which ones you needed to revise. When you look at the county plans, and I put the, I'll stop sharing now. I put the link to this website is here. You would build, instead of like having the state put these plans, impose them, or ask the counties to do these documents that nobody looks at, you would have these just a very honest, transparent discussions in each community, and you would build a set of goals and objectives. The example I always use is the New York initiative, where the mayor reached out to the governor reached out to the mayor in 1989 and said we wanted to respond to homeless issue with people with mental illness. They came up with a plan to build 5,000 units within 5 years. They signed an agreement that laid out accountability, who was going to do what, how much it was going to cost, and lo and behold, it worked, and it was renewed 2 more times until we had a governor and a mayor that didn't speak to each other anymore. But it laid the groundwork for a policy that actually achieved measurable results. That's such a rare occurrence that in general, the city, the state doesn't trust the localities to do this stuff. But as you saw from those plans that the city produces, they need the state to do anything, because the state basically pays for most of the mental health services, either through Medicaid or local assistance, which amounts to probably $4 or $5 billion. And the cities raises money to do some things, but mostly they require the state's support. So our focus is on the state and changing the way it makes these decisions, and by drawing the Department of Health into the conversation as well. So our goal with our bill we've put forward is to examine the way mental health planning, health planning occurs, and then come up with a piece of legislation within the next 2 years that would revamp the process on a wholesale level. That's my comment on the city's mental health plan.
That's terrific. Thank you so much, Steve. That was super informative. I'm going to open it up to the committee for questions. Charles, I think you're first.
Hi. So I have 3 quick questions. First question, I'm not too sure. I had to apologize for the presentation, which was very informative. I'm not too sure whether you're for or against the city's involuntary, I guess, bill My second question is, I'm a bit confused about your comment about social. It sounded like you said, and I do forgive me if I'm not completely getting it right, but it sounded like you said not many social workers, there's high turnover, not many of them want to be in the field. And I think you said some of them don't know the neighborhood. So I was just a bit wondering if you are basing that off any statistics, and also if they're there to help people in a mental health crisis, why being familiar with the neighborhood would that be important? Because surely it's about the person and what they're going through at that moment, not, the neighborhood. So I wasn't too sure about that.
Right,
And
right.
I did have a third question, but I can't remember it. But I'll let you
All
deal
right.
with those two first.
All right. I think the first was about the involuntary removal. I'm very much opposed to it. And I think what I was trying to say, that if there's 200 people that are in desperate need, why don't we develop a strategy around those 200 people and start thinking about what kind of services or supports would be effective with them? And maybe they need to be in a hospital type setting for some period of time, but you don't need to go and change state law and have this and change the rules around what involuntary removal requires, which is a very broad kind of, it's like a shotgun to do something that you could do with a much less extreme approach. There's always this argument, oh, well, if you don't agree with that, then you're just going to let people deteriorate on the street, and that's not true. I'm opposed to people deteriorating on the street. I am in favor of thinking through different strategies to get people off of the street. And we have very limited number of strategies in place right now. We could greatly expand that. We opened the first Peer Run Respite Center in 2013. There should be 10 or 20 of those places now. And the state hasn't seen it necessary or important to financially support them because they're kind of expensive to run. They're only 10 or 12 beds. They cost about $1 million a year to operate. People stay for a week or two, but they're tremendously effective in sort of connecting people to follow-up care because they've never had a chance to be someplace for that period of time and talk to people about kind of issues in their life, what would work, what they've found beneficial in the past, and the kinds of kind of options that are available to them in the system, because the system is very complex in terms of trying to find something. And there's a lot of stuff. There's this thing called ghost services. They're listed as, oh yeah, we have all these clinics and so forth. Yeah, try to get an appointment in them, and it's very difficult. So you really kind of need a health navigator, a coach, or something like that. And these respite centers are very effective at that. There's not enough of them. It could be a lot more, and variations on that theme to address these 200 people or 1,000 people, whatever the number is. Putting people in the hospital also doesn't really solve anything, because they're going to come out of the hospital, and where are they going to come out to, and what sort of supports are going to be available to them. The issue so Cahoots was the kind of original sort of gold standard. They started in 1990. The city of Eugene contracted with a mental health agency to respond to 911 calls. And it's a community of about 250,000 people. So it is comparable to to a 911 call area, there's dispatch zones. They're usually 2 or 3 precincts. And what you see in Eugene is that the provider who's doing the emergency response also is familiar with the businesses. Homeless people tend to go to certain places, and they might go to the McDonald's, they might go someplace else. And so the businesses will actually call the support team, have conversations with them about people that are coming there. The support team knows where to go find people. Not everything that has to respond to a 911 call. You develop a community network, and you start to get a sense of what kind of services people, what the gaps are and so forth. So to have the crisis support team sort of be integrated into the neighborhoods and be familiar with the community-based organizations. A lot of people congregate around soup kitchens, pantries, places like that, churches, church-based shelters. There is a kind of informal network that exists in a lot of these neighborhoods that they don't want to call 911. They're desperate when that happens. And if you had a team that was sort of embedded, and you don't need social workers to do that. That comment about Mary cut me little short. I had 4 decades of experience, and I was sort of surprised.
Sorry, Steve.
I was sort of surprised that social workers didn't, they've spent a lot of money going to NYU and Columbia and so forth. And most of them go into doing therapy. The community organizer track doesn't attract nearly as many people. And you don't need that kind of training necessarily to be an effective outreach worker. And we pioneered hiring people with mental health issues to do it. And we built a training academy called the Howie the Harp Center. And with 600 hours of training, it took over about 6 months and 3 months of internships. We were graduating 80 people a year. That's 40 people in the class, about 80 people a year going into human service jobs. And agencies were delighted to hire people that had this dual capacity of empathy and understanding from a personal experience, but also had then now this training on systems and writing and so forth that they could bring to bear. So we encouraged the city to hire people like that and hire people who had been maybe working in these local communities in some sort of capacity with some experience with homeless people to be on these teams, but they are getting hired as employees of the Health and Hospitals Corporation and with these credentials attached to them. So that's my issue. I think we did a whole paper on how to fix the program. It's on I think it's on the CCIT NYC.
Thank you. I just remember my third question. So if someone was involved in a car accident, for example, in the street, an ambulance would take them to the hospital, and they would get treatment, and then there'll be a care plan to help them. Maybe they would need time in a rehab center to recover, maybe to walk again or to speak again or something like that. So surely if someone's having a mental health crisis and they are really in danger of themselves or others, and they're completely having some sort of a hallucination or delusion, and surely surely they should be able to be taken to the hospital. And then if they're in the hospital, obviously I think the point is not to keep them committed forever, but is to give them the care to help them improve. Isn't that similar to if someone was
that would be the ideal. And I think I was saying earlier, you don't necessarily need to go to a hospital. You could go to maybe one of these respite centers, which were originally designed to be the alternative to going to an ER. That most people who go to ERs are sent away. What you described as a car accident, which is a broken bone, right? And you need this time and you're getting the sort of the level of care that's appropriate for that condition. And determining the level of care is not so easy with people that have been on the street. You see a psychotic person on the street, you don't know it's because they haven't slept in 2 weeks and haven't eaten regularly and are just it is stress related, or is there really underlying issues? There was a story in the New Yorker this week about a woman who spent 500 days in a cave, and she kind of went a little batty, and she's still not well. And they said, oh, she's suffering from post-traumatic stress syndrome. She did it on purpose. She wanted to, for various reasons. So, but that happens to people a lot. And that was the other aspect about the respite center. You give somebody, they get to eat regularly and sleep. Everybody had a private room and they could come and go as they pleased. So they weren't on a locked ward, weren't getting, just pumped full of medication. You see these transformations in what's somebody's behavior and thinking and so forth. It's quite remarkable. So I'm an advocate of like giving people what they, what they need. Maggie?
Thanks, Steve. Justin?
Great, thank you. Thanks so much for coming here to present. This was really interesting. So understanding that you're generally or very much against the overall proposals as it relates to the state law, I'm curious to get your views on the pieces that pertain to the easing of the credential requirements to enable like approving or recommending involuntary removal from just like doctors to a broader population of folks. So you spoke, very aptly about like how difficult it is to attract and retain talent for these engagement teams generally. And I imagine like to get doctors on these teams in a position where they would be making these recommendations, it's that much more difficult. And especially like given how the healthcare system has changed so much, like, half the time when I go to the doctor, I don't even get the doctor to talk to me, I'm talking to a PA. Are you kind of supportive of the argument they're making on like having more folks who are more directly involved be given this authority, or are you kind of still opposed to that?
Yeah, I think the premise is incorrect. So no matter who's making the decision, and I have to look at the actual bill again, the bill language. It was very broad in terms of, it's not that it wasn't that the car accident had happened and they're laying there injured. They are at risk of having the car accident. And so we're going to bring them in before the car accident happens, and determining, how would you determine who that is? And, the city has lists and it's not very transparent, but it would be good if it was more transparent. But they do keep lists of high risk individuals. They call it a safe, NYC safe, something like that. And they have rolled out intensive mobile treatment teams, which are excellent. They are not Medicaid funded. You don't have to, have contact with people on a required number of times to get billing and so forth. And their caseloads are very small. For the IMTs, you maybe have one worker to every 5 people. They don't care who you hire. They just want you to engage with people who are been very difficult to engage with, who are cycling through the jail, the street, and hospitals. And their success rate is pretty high in terms of being able to engage with people. They run into the same issues around, they get somebody that's ready for housing and they can't find a spot for them, or a provider turns them down in the interview because they don't have enough insight into their mental illness and stuff like that. Or landlords won't accept a Section 8 certificate that gets attached to them. So those are real barriers that are kind of, you could address. So there is a program that is being effective in engaging with people. And what are the barriers to preventing the people they're engaging with to get into housing, and started looking at those kinds of things instead of going to Albany to try to change state law around who can commit people. Brian Stetton worked for Elliot Spitzer and drafted Kendra's Law. And he's been an advocate of this approach for 25 years. And Andrew Goldstein, who pushed Kendra Webdale, had voluntarily gone into the hospital 13 times. He had voluntarily gone to programs that he liked. He'd been kicked out of programs because he was kind of a pain in the neck guy. But they passed, they created this whole law for people who refuse treatment around a false premise in the first place. And so these assumptions that Brian and others are making about what the problem is are just not believable, and they're not supported by evidence, and that it's better to try more things and to have more discussion. And again, this is our seat at the table campaign. If you get more people in the room who have some experience, you start generating new ideas. And that's what businesses do every day. It's called design thinking. It's not that hard, but it threatens people who think that they're in charge of things and are supposed to be, setting policy. It's better to set, you can make better policy if you have more kind of front end discussion around these issues, which are complex and hard to solve. The communities that have been most successful adopt strategies and stick to them over a period of time. Miami-Dade started training all their officers in this CIT stuff back in 2003, 2004. They don't have any issues around police. And, I did a ride along. They're very proud of their way they handle situations like this. But they had a consistent plan that was carried out over 2 decades. That's why I was hopeful that if we train the officers, that would do that. But it is very hard to change the culture of a police department, and that's when we really adopted a sort of no police strategy as superior. It's still good to train the officers, but they get to the precincts and then they start using EDP and they start using all this, psycho terminology and stuff, and so it's dehumanizing from a day-to-day basis. So better that the police are there if there's some role for them, but most time it's not necessary.
Thank you. That was very informative. And then one other question. So in your proposal, the seat at the table proposal, at what level do you imagine this decision making or these bodies meet and make decisions?
Yeah. So it would start with you can start next January. We're going to have the Department of Mental Health wants to look at everything it's doing in terms of mental health planning and start having a forums and discussions and bringing people together and strategizing around the 3,000 or 5,000. First of all, get some real data. How many people are we actually talking about? Where are they? Talking about communities where there's gaps. Where are those communities? What are those gaps? So you start generating some real data, put that out first, let people react to that and question what's accurate and what's not accurate. And then you have the basis then for start talking about solutions. So I've been involved in some of those discussions. They've tried them once in a while, and you get sticky notes, and people go up on the board and they sort of cluster around. You start getting some consensus around different ideas, and then everybody goes home, and you don't know if any of your ideas made any difference because there's our planners that have sort of a bias, like Brian Stetton. He has a bias around this particular approach. So, and I've talked to him. He's not a bad guy, but I think he's wrong as this issue. And I wish we could have some real honest discussions and sort of bring people together who do the work.
Thank you.
Mohit, do you have a follow-up question?
Yeah, it's not a follow-up to Tristan's question, but I have a question.
Go ahead.
So Steve, thank you for the presentation and all of the efforts you've led these past 40 years in working in the city. I think what's clear to me from your presentation is that there are 2 main issues, one in which we have a lack of mental health planning that's comprehensive and inclusive of multiple different parties. You don't necessarily think that when it comes to the legislative agenda of Mayor Adams that we need to pursue a change in state law. One of the things that the committee is trying to do is form an opinion on that specific legislative agenda so that we can come together and potentially take a position on whether we'd be for or against that agenda or that specific bill. So I'm just trying to capture any other specific issues that you might have as it pertains to that bill that's currently being discussed. What I've heard so far is that we can more comprehensively plan, which I don't think is mutually exclusive, or that it doesn't need to be state law. Are there any other specific concerns that you might have?
Well, we have a bill. It is, we hope it'll be introduced. There'll be a bill number within the next week or two. We have a cover memo. I'll send you all a copy, or send Mary a copy of our cover memo that kind of outlines the basic principles as I just described them. And we'd love your support for that. That would be great. I think we have 30 to 40 sponsors lined up once it's introduced, including the leadership of both the Senate and the Assembly, and on both sides of the aisle. When you talk to elected officials, they get it, because people call them all the time. Families call them, people that are needing service call them, providers are calling them. There's sort of a catch basin for what's going on in their communities. So they know the system is not working, and they know there's gaps. When you look at those plans, we actually looked at all 57 plans at one point and just say, what are the common themes? So it's housing, transportation, crisis services, overdose, workforce, and maybe one other, which are common themes across the state. And you don't need the same thing in each community. I was doing some work in Buffalo. You don't need to build more affordable housing. If people had housing vouchers, there's housing stock available. You need to produce more units in New York City, but not everywhere. That's just one example. And workforce is really you need the agencies have to be solvent and have the resources to do the work and offer people decent salaries and retirement benefits and things like that, to retain people. And the state has to stop requiring certain degrees or some, for different kinds of jobs that, focus on the outcomes of what the program is doing and not the inputs in terms of, staffing models and so forth. And the programs that produce better results should be rewarded financially for that. So none of that happens.
Can I just follow up? Thank you for that. So just to synthesize, what I'm hearing that is, again, we need more comprehensive planning. We need more of our peers at the table, but there aren't any additional specific concerns about the legislation that we're discussing, right? Those are the broad areas in which I think we can do. You think we can do better? But
there are so many recommendations that are floating around. The Assembly did a study in 1976, found the same, siloed programs, no accountability, so forth. Another one came out 95, 2000. So, and there's the City Council has done studies. There's hundreds of recommendations floating around that have never been acted upon. And so to do a planning process that's collaborative, you can start with a whole pile of ideas that have already been, put together based on a lot of research and that are quite good. But there are always one reason or another why it costs money. So there's plenty of money in the system, is my other firm belief, and it's a matter of stop spending it on the expensive parts. If you wait till people get sick, it's going to cost a lot more than if you keep them well, and that's true in any healthcare system. So we see potential savings if you were smarter about helping people in when they're needed. Just add this: the state just got approved a Medicaid waiver called 1115 waiver to create social care networks. There'll be 9 of them around the state, and they'll focus on social determinants of health. So it would be using Medicaid dollars for stuff like housing and transportation, the very basic things that people need that would immeasurably improve their lives. So that's a hopeful thing. So our bill actually references that and sort of coordinates that, and that's under the health department. That's the Medicaid office under the Department of Health, who never coordinates with Office of Mental Health. They're two different, state agencies. So there's an opportunity to actually have some resources available that, and focused. If communities could come together and set priorities and say, these are the three things we want to work on, we think are most important. And then you would have this pool of Medicaid dollars as well as the pool of state local services funds, which is $2.5 billion or so statewide. It's a lot of money. And it needs to be used smarter.
Thank you.
So I just want to follow up on Mohit's question, because would you say we should recommend the other parts of the bill where the clubhouse model, the respite, the Be Heard, should we have them proceed with some of that, or should we?
Well, yeah, well, you can say yes with the following, Be Heard could be improved if it was, you'd want to see some data around how well Be Heard is doing. And I said, I think they're having hiring problems, they're having turnover problems. They're not putting that on their website. That's hearsay. So it'd be good to ask those questions, see some solid evaluation. The other issue is when you respond to somebody in a crisis, what happens to them? Do they call again in a month? Are they connected to some kind of service or support? And that was one of my things about Eugene in terms of the Cahoots project. It had a lot of positive things, but they kept seeing the same people over and over again, which indicates that your system has some gaps if crises keep reoccurring. So you want to draw down the number of people who call, which requires collecting data on who's calling. In any system, there's always a small number of people who produce inordinate results. Is that happening with Be Heard? I suspect it is, but they're not sharing that information. So I think before you just give it a stamp of approval, I think you'd want to ask some more questions about and what are their plans for expansion, and based on what kind of success they think they're having. What was I forgot what the other? Oh, the respite programs are great if they can. I don't know exactly if that's in what I'm going to have the plan. I guess I can look at it.
I think Renee had a question.
Yeah. I know, Sarah, did you have a question?
Yeah, sort of in line with how funds are being used. One thing you talked about that was really interesting to me was clubhouses, but in reading the proposal, like you mentioned, it was extremely vague and it was mostly sort of signaling to expanding the program without really talking about the effectiveness of it. So would you want the city to go in a direction wherein they're not expanding these programs, but rather making them more efficient and more transparent, or in a different direction entirely?
Yeah. Are you talking about just the clubhouses now? Or something?
Yeah, specifically.
Yeah. Well, the clubhouses, there are a bunch of providers who are doing, there's 18 or so, I think. Why don't you have a discussion with those folks and maybe bring in other people who are interested in doing clubhouses but haven't done them yet? A lot of people haven't bothered with it because you can't do it financially. It's very hard. So there are 18 to their credit. Fountain House is an outlier. It has a very wealthy board. They have foundations on their board. They were founded by Wall Street, money, 50 years ago or 60 years ago, 70 years ago, something like that, 1960 or 1959. So they're an outlier, and they've been able to sort of do very well. But even they took over a group in the Bronx, and they wanted to put a new clubhouse up in the Bronx, and they've been doing a capital campaign for 3 years to do one building. So how are you going to triple the capacity of these programs with no new capital infusion? I actually put out a kind of a cynical document a couple of weeks ago with basically say you could do it all virtual. Then You actually probably could. You don't need a clubhouse per se. You could have spaces that you rent and use to bring people together and do a lot of those clubhouse type activities scattered throughout the city. And you could have cooking classes, and you could have nutrition programs, exercise, give everybody a gym membership, and then have a coach go with people to gyms, because people are uncomfortable sometimes if they've never been in a gym. They don't know what to wear or what to do when they get there. Give everybody make sure everybody had a cell phone. You sort of like the benefits of membership, and then see what happened. And you could easily then expand this to maybe more than 15,000. And you could maybe reach people in these very hard to serve communities where you're not going to go in and build a multi-million-dollar clubhouse structure anytime soon, but you could be using existing community resources like libraries and social and churches and stuff like that to bring people together to do a lot of what the essential part of being a member of a clubhouse involves, without investing in a lot of unnecessary real estate.
Thank you.
So check. I know Renee and Charles had no questions.
You said, go ahead, Renee.
Sorry.
You had your hand up for a long time.
Can't hear you.
I think your microphone back up, Renee.
Sorry, I'm wondering if you can hear me now.
Yeah.
So I understand that the plan is not perfect, that the mayor's putting forward, but sometimes perfect is the enemy of the good.
We can't hear you, Renee.
Renee, we can't hear you. You're gonna be like very close, it looks like, to your mouth.
I'm trying. Can you hear me now?
A little better.
Barely, but yes.
Okay, so I know the plan is not perfect that the mayor's putting forward, but sometimes the perfect is the enemy of the good.
Mhm.
What can we take from this that we can move forward? Because we've been asking for plans on CB5 to address mental illness for a very long time. What can we take from this plan to say, from this plan, that is good?
Yeah, I think the principles of it are very good. That it should be based on rights, that there's, anti-racist, there you should be, reaching out to communities in need. And I would think about your own community board and what you see on the street every day, whether you think this plan is addressing those issues or not. And you might want to say, we need more specifics. You say you're going to respond to homelessness, that there's 13,000 people in the shelter of the street, and we probably have a couple thousand of them right here in Community Board 5. And I'm not seeing anything in the plan that is specifically addressing that. And increasing involuntary removal, even by their own admission, is only for a small number of people. Is not really going to, I think, address the issues that you see in your community every day. So you like the principles behind what they're putting forward to, but you would like to see more specific details so you could come back a year from now and say, did this set of initiatives and interventions produce a noticeable result for our community? And if it works for your community, that's great. It means it could work for other communities. And your community is a lot more sophisticated, I think, in terms of being able to challenge the city on those kinds of issues.
So if I could just, an additional question. So if we had measurable outcomes right now, with what we're seeing now and implementing this plan, measurable outcomes after, say, a year, that would be a way to sort of look at whether this plan is viable. Is that what you're saying?
I haven't looked at I assume you have some sort of a community needs assessment. I mean, in terms of housing, homelessness, whatever. So that, does this plan address those needs? And if it does, how so? If it doesn't, how not? You might, I don't know if you have any clubhouses. I don't know if Fountain House is in your, I don't think it is. It's on the West 47th Street. It's probably too far. But you might have clubhouses, you might talk to some clubhouse providers in your community district, find out what their feeling is. Talk to other providers.
Sounds good. Questions from the public?
Thank you, Julie. Zul Zolkwitz. Steve, thank you so much for a very comprehensive plan. I hope every member of Community Board 5 will really take the time to study this carefully. You know, also, thanks for pointing out that, you know, in the Wayback Machine, when the mayor's administration and the governor's administration got together, we saw some results. But that's way back. And I've been working on the Street Homeless Advocacy Project initiated by Norman Siegel, Bob Hayes, Harriet Doe, Deborah Berkman, many others for about 16 months now. The mayor endorsed her, but all the resources that, you know, we try to go out with and start these neighbor to unhoused neighbor group with, the stabilization beds, the psych beds, all the resources that you can think of, everything from the cell phones to the clubhouses, we can't get those. And then basic things that are there. I mean, it's taken us up to a year for a very small number to get folks who have Section 8 vouchers, who have SHIP vouchers to get into housing. It's just at every metric, it's as poor as can be. And I think what you're really, you know, telling us is for us to really study this in a comprehensive way, get behind a very comprehensive bill that will, and both city and state and the feds, and then we really can make quite a difference. One of the things that you're saying about the social workers, many of these people, not only do they not want to do these jobs, but the ones who do really have no idea of who this demographic is. And there are people out here who do, and we can work with them. A lot of the folks who do the outreach for Department of Homeless Services are excellent. Unfortunately, a lot of the vendors who are getting the contracts are not. And there is a ton of money. I mean, we are awash with money that is going into deep pockets. Thank you, Steve, and thanks everyone on the board.
Was that a question or?
That was a comment.
Okay.
Yeah, but this is an example of somebody who's got hands-on experience. You've seen you've seen what works and you've seen what barriers exist. And that is valuable information. And it should be part of if you're doing a plan, you say, all right, you got people in Section 8, you know, what kind of enforcement can you do to make sure that people have access to, or maybe you have a different, instead of having each person go out and doing their own kind of shopping with a housing, you could put this, all of these resources into a place. There's actually an agency called, I'm an advisor to it, called Anthos Housing, and they are set up to streamline this issue of getting people out of shelters and into housing. It's modeled after a program in LA where the agency actually owns housing or it rents blocks of apartments from landlords. So it cuts out that layer of a person walking around with a Section 8 that the landlord really doesn't want to see, but they're happy to work with an agency who's going to like take care of all of that for them, guaranteeing they're going to get their cash flow from the building. So Anthos Home could be part of your recommendation. They say we want to do something like that, expand this kind of a resource so that the people we are finding who want to go into housing and have the resources to do it are not faced with artificial barriers.
Hey, thank you, Steve. That was really helpful. I think we can do comments. Mohit, or
I think Mary was first. You can go.
yeah, Mary.
Yeah, Steve, thanks so much. I know you'd be brilliant, so that's why I invited you to come. A couple of takeaways is, again, we have the money. And I think the analogy to going back to the person with the broken leg, let's not wait till people are in extreme distress. And the total lack of real numbers in this that was given to us by the city, even throwing around, buzzwords like housing first. Well, what does that mean? There's no commitment to, sounds like this Anthos group is trying to do exactly that.
Yeah.
So sort of getting down to brass tacks, this is news to me. This is a huge opportunity that the state got the Medicaid waiver. This has been a huge stumbling block. And again, for people to realize that, the folks doing outreach on the front lines are running into the same problems over and over again. You can hospitalize people, but what do we do with them at the end of that process? So thanks so much. And I'm just happy to highlight, it's all about the follow-up.
There is going to be a webinar on the waiver. I just got an email. Stakeholder webinar. So it's just approved. It's going to be on February 6th at 5 o'clock. If you go on the MRT listserv for the Department of Health, you can listen in. And maybe you'll see something or hear something that relates to the issues you have in your community.
Steve, thank you again for presenting today. And Mary, I do agree with your takeaways. I think that the clearest takeaway here from what you've told us, Steve, is that there needs to be better planning from a mental health perspective, and it needs to be more collaborative. My comment would be that I don't see that being mutually exclusive with supporting the Adams legislation on mental health. I think the only concerns that I heard were around that changing state law might not be necessary. But if we want to take action now, and that's the option available, I'm not hearing many other concerns, particularly some of the parameters Tristan mentioned around making sure that there's equity in how individuals are treated and diagnosed in these situations. And so my comment would be that I think it makes sense here as a board to support the Adams legislation, but at the same time caveat that with the idea that there needs to be more comprehensive planning. That what we'd like to see is groups like Seat at the Table or other similar types of groups come together to get broader perspectives, but that we can do both rather than denying support for the existing bill out of the hope that there's a better plan that comes along over time.
I'd only point out whenever there's like involuntary AOT and so forth, people of color are disproportionately impacted. And they say, well, those are the people that are in the mental health system. Well, that's true because they've been disproportionately impacted from a long time ago. So, who's financially stressed, who winds up in our jails, who winds up on our streets. And this is, the consequences of that is then when you say, oh, well, we're going to make people now accept this treatment that we believe that they will benefit from. You're just sort of adding on to a whole, when you talk about anti-racism, that's what you're coming down to reinforcing an approach that's been there for, whatever, 400 years. So stop and think about what else you could do and what else you could support that is more equitable. And you don't have
just to reemphasize.
This legislation is not going to pass. There's no support for it in the legislature. You will never. Carl Heastie's never going to, and Andrew Stewart Cousins. They're never ever going to. It's not going to see the light of day. So you can support it, but why not support something positive?
Yeah, and so just to, and I don't know if we're allowed to debate here, or give comments, but I don't think, as you've mentioned, they're mutually exclusive. I personally haven't heard any reasons to not support the bill, other than that we prefer not to make a change in state law. It seems that the credentialing is there, the right parameters are in place to make sure that there's at least an interim plan, and maybe something you mentioned, we might need more measurable outcomes and metrics for success to make sure that the plan as it's presented today is something that will be successful. I also agree with what Mary said, in that one of our objectives should be that we should prevent people from getting to that situation in the first place and being on the street. But again, I don't think that these are at all mutually exclusive. Both can be done at the same time. And in the context of what we're thinking about as a committee, whether we want to support the topic that we had in last month's meeting, which was for or against the legislation that Brian Stenton had proposed, this doesn't, in my mind, at least change anything to say that we shouldn't support that, right? We can also support other things that help the mental health crisis in New York.
Yeah, I think that was part of my question too, and
Yeah.
I think we're all on the same page. It's just how nuanced does our response want to be?
Yeah, and maybe that's, sorry, go ahead, but maybe that's a caveat around increasing resourcing for mental health and discussion around mental health, while also supporting the bill.
I just had a question. Are we leading up to a vote at some point where,
Not for this one,
not for tonight, but at some future meeting, we're gonna,
next month.
got it, okay.
Okay, so Tristan, then Charles, and Mary and Zona, sorry.
Yeah, I actually was literally about to comment on that exact point. So like I definitely think that we should take a position on like a combination of the mayoral plan, the state changes, and then something about appropriation, support for funding for all these state and city programs to achieve, everything that we want to achieve. But I think like because the state item wasn't in the agenda, we can't take a position on it today. So like definitely supportive of everything I just said. But maybe we don't need it, like I'll debate it tonight if we're going to do it again next month.
Like, exactly. Charles, Zona, Mary.
Hi. Yeah, so I just might make my comment. So there was a New York Times article just yesterday. It's titled "The Dilemma of the Man in Room 117." I don't know if you guys want me to put in the chat or email it later to you guys, but you guys can search it up. And it's very in depth about a man who coincidentally was involuntarily committed, someone not of color, by the way. And the struggle his parents went through, the whole system of him going through housing, and then back into problems again. And it seems like the problem is, it's when the person is released from involuntary commitment, it's how they stay on their medications, because a lot of times these medications have side effects, since such as weight gain and like low energy and things like that. And everyone wanted to help this person. He got so much support and everything, but the problem is where he was housed when he was going through episodes, the other residents were getting scared. So I think there needs to be not just putting in a feel-good, knee-jerk piece of legislation, but there definitely has to be more to support the person. I'm very big into what's the aftercare going to be, that this person needs to, these people need to be helped to stay on their medications, to stay on the right path, to be encouraged to keep going, not just dumped in an apartment and left to their own devices. But it's a really good article, and I do believe there should be a mixture, like the other board members were saying. So maybe next month I'll be in favor for a letter of something like that, maybe. Thanks.
Thanks, Charles. Zona?
Yeah, I feel like based on the discussion today, I certainly agree with folks just on the helpfulness of having more measurable goals tied to these policies, but would be comfortable supporting the discussion topic today with those like broad themes. As it relates specifically to inpatient and voluntary admissions, I still don't feel like personally, I have enough to be supportive of it, like from an outcomes perspective and from like just a equity perspective. It's like unclear if this is really improving outcomes for these patients, and especially in the context of spending more energy and capital towards lower acuity methods of treatment and ways to make sure that people stay out after they stay and have functioning lives and adhere to medication. Like, it just doesn't seem like totally clear to me that like involuntary admission is like the right answer.
Yep. I might also suggest that you talk to people who've been in the system. And there are groups, Alliance for Rights and Recovery, which used to be called NIAPRIS, statewide group. Have them come on and talk to you about their experiences of being hospitalized. And they're uniformly opposed to anything, not uniformly opposed, I'd say broadly opposed to this approach, and there's reasons for that. So I'm just relaying what I've seen in my work.
I was just gonna say, it feels like involuntary emissions might be the hot button issue with the whole vote overall. So I guess just whenever next month, when we come down to vote on it, we might want to drill down very specifically about what we're all kind of voting on and not. I mean, and it's also kind of a personal question about where we all believe about personal freedoms for law and whatever, and I could give you my opinion, but I don't even know if it'll matter. But I'm just, you know, we might want to just be very specific about what we're voting on or not.
Okay, sounds good. Mary, did you have a?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank Charles for his comment. As Steve knows, my late husband worked at Pathways to Housing, and as with Steve's work, it really is about supporting people in permanent housing. And those support services are so critical. So you're absolutely right, Charles, you can't just put someone in housing and walk away. That's a very lonely prospect for someone who's been on the streets, that isolation. And to speak to what Steve has said so much tonight, finding the right caseworkers, finding that, and then having the respite, you know, making sure that that place is there for that person that's what's going to interrupt this cycle. And I guess that's just my overall point is, you know, we're interested in making a difference. What will make a difference and interrupting that cycle? Yes, we need more long-term psychiatric beds. They don't even spell out how many that is in this, but we need the supportive housing so that people feel that when they do decompensate, that there's someone there, first of all, that will help them before they get to that state. But if they do, that their place will be there for them. And so it is about, you know, making them full-fledged members of our community.
Sounds great. Any other comments? Okay. Thank you so much,
Oh,
Steve.
sure. Thank you. I just admire your time you spent on this. Is really, you deserve credit for doing this. So,
Yeah, we hope you can come back. We continue to have these discussions. So thank
Okay.
you so much.
if our bill gets passed, well, we're going to do a couple of forms. We're going to have I think we're trying to get a hearing. You know, you do hearings in Albany now. Every, you know, the committee on mental health, and then the legislators are all there, and the agencies do presentations and so forth. And then people who actually use services maybe get 5 minutes at the end to talk, or don't even know that there's a hearing taking place. But we have a couple legislators that are prepared to let us sponsor a hearing, and we would sort of turn that around, and that the people who use services would get first dibs and to talk about what they feel they could use that would be beneficial, that's missing or that's not working for them. So I'll let you know.
Okay, yeah, keep us updated. We'll look out for that bill.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Cole.
Julie. Julie.
Sorry. Yes.
Julie, is it okay to email everyone that New York Times link, or do people want to just find it themselves individually?
I love that.
Yeah, definitely. Go ahead. Send us the link.
Perfect. Thank you. Yeah, I can do that. Thank you very much. Thank you. I'll send it an email, right? Is that better?
That sounds good.
Perfect.
Yep.
Thank you. Good night, guys. Thank you.
Oh, we still have one more item.
Oh, whoops.
Hopefully we can be more efficient. I can share this draft letter that Renee put together for our budget response. Does anyone have any comments to the letter or budget requests? Renee?
If I could jump in, the long term, know that
We can't hear you very well, Renee. Sorry.
I'm so
Give me that.
Is this better? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
So long-term members of the committee might remember that we always respond to the preliminary budget. We send a letter sort of outlining, respond to our register, which is our request that we made during the budget request period, and also commenting more generally. And that's what this draft is, but it's only a draft. So I invite everyone to jump in. I think they received the register and I've heard about the preliminary budget and received a copy of it.
I can't hear any audio.
Same. You might have lost the room. They look black.
Oh dear. Hopefully they will come back.
Oh, I hear you.
It's like, I think it's,
Oh,
it's like wobbly.
The owl is working now, apparently.
Oh, you got it.
Can you hear us?
Welcome back.
But we can't hear her now.
I can hear you.
Hear us? Can't see you though. But you
I
can.
don't know. It's like the perfect system.
Think about. Microphone on his ear.
can you guys hear us? You in the room?
Okay, Renee, can you hear us now?
I can hear you. Can you,
Okay.
can you hear us?
Yeah, turn your volume all the way up.
I can't hear you guys. Can Tristan try to say something?
Hi. Testing.
Well, we can hear Tristan, Renee.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Hi,
This is
hi.
Renee.
Renee, we can hear you. Go ahead.
No, all is good. If you can hear me, that's good.
Yes. We can hear you very much better than before. Go ahead. Did you want to, because we didn't hear very much of what you said initially, so if you could just repeat a little bit of what you were saying.
Okay. So people who have been on the BEX committee for a while understand that we have always responded. We have the opportunity as a community board, it's not mandatory, but we do have the opportunity to respond to the mayor's preliminary budget. So what has been sent to everyone has been a copy of the preliminary budget and a response to our requests. And this letter is the opportunity for us to weigh in and sort of let our council members and the mayor know how we feel about response to our requests and also the preliminary budget generally.
Thank you, Renee. Everybody got that? We're responding to the mayor and okay. So comments to letter. We want to vote on this because we need to submit this in a couple of weeks.
I have a question maybe before you get to comment. All right.
Sure.
We note in the bottom of the letter that essentially a number of these say refer to the agency or like talk to them for more information or whatnot. I'm wondering, does that happen every year? Is that something new? I don't feel like I don't remember this from last year, but maybe I wasn't paying as close attention as I should have. This preponderance of responses that just say, like, get in touch.
You mean the budget requests?
Yeah, like we say in our letter, like there are a number of requests that say get in touch with the agency.
Mhm.
And we hope that this leads to forward response. So I guess what I understand is that how realistic is that expectation that we will get? Like if we got that response, it's over and try again next year, is that?
Yeah, I think a lot of community boards just resubmit the same request every
Yeah.
year until they,
Yeah, we did that too. I think a number of these are, I was curious if
Yeah.
that's what that answer meant and that's what we intend to do.
Let's check with Renee. Renee, do you have any comments to that? Can't hear you.
Hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, so this response is something that we've received every single year since I've been on the board. And what it requires is that we follow up and we actually speak to the agencies and hopefully it will result in something. Does it always? Absolutely not. To be perfectly honest. So we can make budget requests with absolute specificity. There's a pothole on 26th Street between Park and Lexington. We will get the same response. Oh, the agency needs more information. I mean, I don't know what information they need, but they do. So we just have to follow up and do what is requested. And I'm sorry, I wish I could be more upbeat about it, but that's our reality.
Okay, thank you, Renee.
Thank you. Tristan, then Charles.
Yes, I thought the letter was very well written. I am supportive of passing it tonight.
Thank you. I'm sorry, Renee, I think your hand was up too. Charles, do you want to go?
Oh, can I go? Yeah, I was just before I say my comment, with me being blind, I'm not sure if Renee has her camera on, but I was thinking maybe her sound might improve if she puts her camera off. It might help with if she's on her phone. Sometimes that can help, but I'm not too much of a tech whiz, but I just thought it could be a good idea. I was going to say I feel a bit embarrassed, and my apologies to everyone on the committee. I was embarrassed to say that unfortunately the letter wasn't accessible to me, and I feel really, really embarrassed because I had opportunity to mention that to Renee before, but for some reason I didn't. So I just wanted to say I'm not too sure what's in the letter, but I'm in favor with what the committee has written. But I think in future maybe I should let you guys know more. It's my fault for not telling you guys. I feel highly embarrassed, and my apologies for letting you guys down on that. So I'll be a bit more vocal about documents that are not accessible to me, so sorry.
I can try to send it to you right now, Charles.
As a bit of a format is.
Oh, I see. Got it. Okay. We'll have to figure that out next time. Yes. Brad.
I also agree. Thank you for taking the first pass at writing it, and I am supportive of the letter basically as written.
Okay. Renee, were you saying something? I saw you.
No, I'm sorry. This is just process. I want to understand how, is it the register that you can't access, Charles? I want to make sure you can always access things.
Mary mentioned that it needs to be a Word document, not.
Yeah, not PDF. It's the PDFs, unfortunately, weren't accessible. And
Right.
the Excel was really difficult for me to navigate. Sorry about that.
I'm very sorry, and we'll talk about this offline and figure out.
Yeah,
a way
it was
to-
my fault. I really should have.
Sorry.
It was definitely my fault, and I apologize. Thank you.
Okay, we have people in favor of the letter. Okay. Great. So do we want to go ahead and vote?
Motion to approve.
Okay, thank you.
Second.
Thank you. I'm going to be a yes. A Seth?
Yes.
Thank you. Mary?
Yes.
Kevin?
Yes.
Laura?
Yes.
Tristan?
Yes.
Mark?
Yes.
Mike?
Yes.
Isabel?
Yes.
Chuck?
Yes.
Charles?
Yes.
Brad?
Yes.
Donna? Yes. Okay. I think that's it. Okay, thank you, everyone, and okay, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Somebody hit the button on the front.
Yes.